Hello, and welcome back to another Problem with Video. And today we're going to be talking about the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The problem is, there is no problem. That's going to take a little bit of explaining, and let me get to that in a second, because first off, I have to tell you about our sponsors. Today we're brought to you by Gamersupps. Go ahead and go to Gamersupps.com, use the code COMICS, and get yourself some amazing waifu cups, waifu hoodies, and stuff like that, but you can also get amazing energy drinks that are less chalky than their competitors. They're currently one of our long-standing sponsors here at Comicstorian, and if you want to support us directly and get some energy, check out Gamersupps. And I'm also here to tell you about a comic book Kickstarter from Bad Idea called Megalith. There's going to be a couple of pages on the screen right now, but they're running a Kickstarter for one of their comic books. Now, you might be wondering, who is Bad Idea? Now, this is the former executives of Valiant Comics. They launched a brand called Bad Idea, where they make highly collectible and highly sought-after comic books. What they do is they do limited drops at comic book stores, making it very difficult to get their incredible storylines. But they've decided to put this huge book, Megalith, with amazing art up on Kickstarter, and it's already broke $200,000 and is climbing. So if you want to get one of their incredible indie books to your door and not have to seek it out, check out the Kickstarter in the link down below. Now, let's get into the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and what the non-existent problem is. So before we get into what the non-existent problem with Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is, let me tell you my overall thoughts of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I have a full review that's going to be up over on our podcast channel, so I'll link that also. But my quick non-spoiler thoughts is I felt this was a great conclusion to Guardians of the Galaxy. It really brought an end to a lot of our characters, answered a lot of questions that had been left hanging since Endgame, and it really just felt like I was saying goodbye to a group of people that you've kind of gotten to know on a deeper level over the course of 5 movies and a holiday special. It really is a great movie, and it's a return to form for Marvel. But this is where the problem comes in, because what I noticed online is people are looking for excuses as to why they are allowed or not allowed to like the Guardians' third movie, the finale to this whole thing. You see, looking at a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, or any of the previous Marvel movies, whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter what the internet says. It comes down to what you think. It's your personal opinion on the matter. But it has kind of become a popular opinion to just hate the MCU outright. Regardless of if you enjoyed Moon Knight, everyone hates Moon Knight. You have to jump in and hate Moon Knight. Regardless if you chuckled a little bit at She-Hulk, if you're a part of the loud group online that wants to yell about it, then you have to hate She-Hulk if you want to be a part of that group. And that's become the popular thing. When I tweeted out that I actually really enjoyed Guardians 3, what I saw were a lot of responses for people giving excuses as to why they were allowed to like Guardians 3. They would say things like, well, it's James Gunn and he's from the old group, so that means that we can like this one. Or they would say things like, well, we can't like this one because it doesn't fix the MCU, it's just a single thing. And to that argument, I basically state, do you go to every movie and look at how it goes into the larger scheme of things? Does every movie have to be a part of the MCU giant franchise? I prefer ones that do stand out on their own. I also like ones that tie into everything, and I'm the guy that just made a video that said that there is no ongoing narrative. Now, one of the people said that they liked Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and the reason that this one worked is that it wasn't tied into the rest of the MCU. But that's also not accurate. You see, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, one of the primary plots that happens within it is the return of Gamora. And without going deep into that explanation, because I don't want to give you spoilers in this video right here, the Gamora plot point that they're working off of is straight out of Infinity War and Endgame. So the idea that it's not linked to anything else in the entire MCU is kind of looking for an excuse as to why you're allowed to like it, because the entire premise of this movie is based on things that happened. They talk directly about Thanos and the Infinity Stones and Endgame. They talk directly about what's happened to Groot and the stuff that Rocket has gone through. They talk directly about things that have happened to Nebula, all of which you get greater context if you've actually watched all the movies and you know what's going on. But what the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 did a great job of was not making you feel like it was attached to a lot of different things. It felt like a standalone movie because they did a great job of catching you up on things that were linked into everything. But there's a whole reason why I bring this up. The idea of we're allowed to have our own opinions, and the idea that people are trying to just find reasons why they like it or hate it. Because I have an idea as to why this movie did super well. And it's not the argument of, well, it's from the old regime. I don't think that's the case, although it kind of half is. You see, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I think, works very, very well because of James Gunn. And not just because of his humor, his political opinions, or anything that may get people in a riot. I think it's because they let him write all 3 movies and a holiday special. So if you look at what happened with Guardians of the Galaxy 3, we had Volume 1, which was incredible and everyone loved it. It was like a surprise hit in the MCU. Volume 2 was great. And then we ran into the problem of James Gunn being canceled on Twitter for things that he said 10 years ago. Now, I'm not going to go into that controversy because that's a whole thing that is over and done with at this point. But what it boiled down to was the Guardians cast said that they would leave the Marvel Universe and they would not return without James Gunn. Dave Bautista made the biggest stand against that, basically saying, like, you can't just get rid of my friends. I'm not coming back as Drax. So Disney brought him back, and Guardians 3 was given plenty of time to finish up. Now, we have a whole debate about this on our podcast channel, about whether they gave him all of that time because they felt bad, or if they gave him all of that time because of COVID, or if they gave him all that time because they realized they needed time to do all the CG in this movie. However it happened, this movie was given about 2 extra years beyond when it was supposed to come out. When we looked it up, originally it was supposed to come out at the end of 2021 to 2022. Movie was given plenty of time to finish up all of its principal photography, all of its CG, and get the best scenes for the actors. Now, the thing that makes this good is that James Gunn wrote 3. This wasn't passed off, and they didn't have corporate overlords telling you what's going to happen. Rumor has it that in Ant-Man Quantumania, there were 30 rewrites because the corporate overlords wanted it to be so perfect to redeem the MCU. But the movie that is redeeming the MCU in my eyes is Guardians 3, and the reason it worked is because of James Gunn. Now, I've said this like 3 or 4 times, and there's a reason for it. I have said this for as long as I've done Comicstorian. When you let one writer tell his story, and we don't cause issues, you get the best version of a story 90% of the time. The reason Guardians 3 works so well, and it creates a problem for the rest of the MCU, is because James Gunn knows his cast. He wrote their stories. He knew what he wanted to do with Rocket. He knew the tone that he wanted to have with Drax and Mantis. He knew what he wanted to do with Nebula post Volume 2, where we were going to get a turn on the character. All of these things are because James Gunn got to write his full storyline. If we look back to a movie that everyone loves, one of the biggest ones in the MCU, Captain America: Winter Soldier. Now, you notice that no one really comes out and says things like, I love the Captain America trilogy. No, they bring up Captain America: Winter Soldier, and they bring up Captain America: Civil War. And normally Civil War is brought up because of Spider-Man, but for the sake of this, we'll say everyone in the world liked it because of Captain America. The Russo brothers wrote Winter Soldier and Civil War, but you know what you never hear people talk about? Captain America 1. Captain America 1 was not written by the same guy, but the 2 movies that were written by the same brothers, those movies get brought up all the time. Again, the exact same effect as Guardians of the Galaxy 1, 2, and 3. Another great example of the movies being butchered is Star Wars. Everyone likes to revere 4, 5, and 6 as the greatest movies ever made, and they all seem to forget that George Lucas also made 1, 2, and 3, and that's a whole different topic, a whole different thing. But George Lucas at least had a direct hand in what happened with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 7, 8, and 9, the biggest problem, at least I saw as a Star Wars fan, is that they, again, didn't have one director doing them all. They had J.J. Abrams, then they brought in Rian Johnson, and they didn't tell Rian Johnson what they wanted to do. They let him do his own thing. Then J.J. Abrams came back and did what he wanted. So the Star Wars movies were considered a critical flop, even though they did gangbusters and made a ton of money. Critical flop. What I'm getting at is when you constantly change out the person telling the story, you create problems. Now, we see this all the time in American comic books, where a character is introduced by one writer, and the very next line, that character is completely forgotten about. A good example of one of those characters that I super loved when it was a Rick Remender run, and I'm not sure if he wrote it all the way to the end, but for the sake of the video, we're going to say he did. There was a character that was made to be Agent Venom's sidekick called Mania. She was a great character. She was what Flash Thompson wanted to help get over. She was going through a lot of the same things he went through. It was a great character to introduce at the end of the run. And then when the new writer brought in, they not only got rid of Flash Thompson, they got rid of Mania. And that's where our problems come in. When you change out the director, you change out the storyteller. The reason I think Guardians of the Galaxy 3 did so well is that James Gunn got to tell a 3-movie storyline that crossed over into Infinity War Endgame in his holiday special. We need to stop swapping out directors and storytellers. I guarantee you Ant-Man 1 and 2 would have been great with 3 if we just had one guy who wanted to tell a full 3 Ant-Man's movie story. Captain America 2 and 3 were great because we had the Russo brothers. Iron Man, I mean, look at all of these trilogies. Iron Man 1 and 2, people love. 3, people love to hate on, though I have seen it recently, and after a rewatch, I actually really liked that one. But the point I'm making is when you are constantly changing out who is telling the story, who is directing the story, you're not going to get that consistent tone that makes Guardians of the Galaxy 3 as good as it was. If somebody else had come in, sure, we would have gotten an okay movie. It would have been a good finale to the Guardians, but it wouldn't have been this masterpiece that James Gunn just created. And again, you're allowed to have your own opinions. I think it's a masterpiece of MCU potential. You might think it's the worst movie ever, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to say that it was the greatest movie ever. Now, this philosophy doesn't always work, okay? Thor 1, no one really talks about. Thor 2, people consider to be one of the worst movies within the MCU. Again, I recently rewatched it. It's not as bad as we all remember. And Thor 3, people love, so they brought back in Taika Waititi to do 4, and that was terrible. It doesn't always work. This is also a practice that is used quite frequently in manga. The reason why everyone loves One Piece is because for 1,100 chapters, we're close enough that I'm going to say that number, Oda has written the whole thing. It's been one direct line by one guy. He knows where his characters were in chapter 100. He knows where he wants them in chapter 500. He knows where he wants them in chapter 900. We have a similar thing with My Hero Academia. That same writer has been writing that series for all what's going to be 400 chapters in that series. But it also has the same problems in manga when we swap it out. So if you're like me, you've been a fan of Dragon Ball since you were a kid. Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, all written by the same guy. Dragon Ball GT, not written by him. It's one of the series that a lot of the hardcore fans like to crap all over. But a more recent example is Dragon Ball Super ended up on the Universal Tournament arc, I think that's what it's called, the one where he fought Jiren. And then the manga kept going. And the manga is not terrible, but it's a different guy writing it using the notes of the original guy. We don't know what's going to happen if this ever gets translated into anime, and it's a pretty safe assumption it's going to at some point. But what I'm getting at is, regardless of whether or not you like the direction that the Dragon Ball Super manga has gone, it is more divisive than the stuff written by Akira Toriyama. So anyway, what I'm getting at is the problem with Guardians of the Galaxy 3, bringing this all back around, is that it's setting up a standard that I want to see in the MCU, and we're not going to see because that's not how the movie business works. It's not how the comic book business works. We're lucky that James Gunn stuck out for 3 movies to tell one coherent 3 story. Ooh, you want to know another great one? The same guy did all 3 Spider-Man movies. Those worked out very well, and the story consistently runs between all 3 of them. What I'm getting at, like I said, is we need to start seeing that in the MCU. When they bring in a director, the director needs to be signed on for one movie with a clause that if that movie is successful and the MCU wants to continue, that director gets first stab to continue. Obviously, the way the movie industry works, that's not always going to work out, and we're going to keep swapping them out and telling completely different stories in our movies. Tonally, character-wise, character-driven, I mean, whatever character, you know what I'm saying. It's going to change up occasionally, but we should allow these directors that made these smash hits to continue in their roles if they want to. And that's what I would love to see. I want to see that in American comic books. One of my favorite runs in Batman is when Scott Snyder wrote Batman for 6 years, or when Dan Slott wrote Spider-Man for, what is it, like 200 gajillion years? The dude wrote it from like 2005, and he's still writing Spider-Man stuff. Like, those are my favorite runs in American comics, when one person gets to tell a sprawling story that is their idea, their initiative. That's why I love manga, because I love reading one story told by one person, and it's not changed and adapted to feed the corporate overlords, which is apparently what happened to Ant-Man 3, but Guardians 3 got to tell its full trilogy narrative, and I loved it. The problem with Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is that it sets up a standard in the MCU that I want to see going forward, and the MCU is probably not going to do it. The movie's proving that if you give enough time to do the visual effects and the acting, and you give time to the movie, we will have a great movie. But it also is proving that we need to have consistent storytelling running throughout the MCU. We need to be hinting and implying things that are going on elsewhere, but it needs to be so subtle that it doesn't affect the movie. We don't need someone pointing up in the air and shouting, "That's the part from Thanos." We need them to be having a casual conversation in an elevator that links it all together, but you don't need to have watched the previous movies to understand what's going on in the elevator. This is what I want to see from the MCU, and this is why I'm stupid excited that James Gunn is going over to DCEU. You get the guy that made a consistent 3 Guardians movies with a spin-off and the way... Oh, hi, Kitty. Here you go, Kitty. You get to be on the video. You get the guy who made a consistent trilogy with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it was incredible. This is Fang, by the way. This is Fang. Okay, you can go down. You get him on DC, it's going to be incredible. He's writing Superman, he's going to have his hand in everything else that's going on, and he knows what made Guardians work is having one guy handling the whole project with an incredible cast, and he's going to be working towards that with DC, which is why I'm stupid excited for DC. That's what I was getting at before the cat interrupted me. I hope you guys enjoyed the cat. Say cat in the comments down below if you want Fang to become a regular on this show. I'll make her my co-host. I'm sure I can get the cat to sit still for 20 minutes. I'm sure that's a thing. Cat owners know I'm lying. That's it. That's all I got today. I don't want to go too deep into a review for Guardians because this was a discussion about the core reason I liked Guardians and why I feel this is what the MCU needs. So, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. We're already prepping up a Wall-E video for next week, and we're going to have that one ready to go. It's the problem with The Flash fixed. I gotta think of something clickbait, guys. You know how it is. Anyway, thank you so much for your continued support. I will see you next time right here at Comic Story.